One of the things that's always fascinated me about multinational companies is that they have one brand and one big story that they tell globally, but they have to localize it for individual countries and geographies. What's the lesson that we can learn from getting those two things right? How do you have a big story that's localized and relevant? Hello, how you doing? Mark Jones here. Thanks for joining us on the CMO Show podcast, brought to you by ImpactInstitute in partnership with our friends at Adobe. Now, today I've got a really interesting interview with Jennifer Downs. She's the global CMO for eCommerce at Lenovo. Now, of course, this is one of the biggest PC manufacturers in the world. We had an opportunity to sit down just earlier this year at Adobe Summit in Las Vegas, had a chat about what they're doing with AI, of course, and how they're transforming their entire marketing operation around the world. This, of course, plays into a long-running dilemma. How do you have a big brand that works at scale? And you've got to localize your messages and the expression of that brand in different geographies, different markets around the world. Sometimes you can get it right, and sometimes you could get it really, really wrong. So what can we learn from her story? How is she rethinking the way their team operates? And what technologies they use, where, when, why, and how? Let's dive into it. One of the fun things you said just before we started recording was that there are many CMOs at Lenovo.
Yeah.
Now, that's not a common thing from my experience. Why is that the case for you?
We are a very large organization, very complex. And so we have our corporate brand, Lenovo, and we have a CMO that's responsible for that. But we also have various business units. And so each of those business units also has a CMO. And because of the growing nature and importance of e-commerce at Lenovo, about 5 years ago, they asked me to step into that role. And at the time, that was a new role. So pretty exciting for me to step into something that was brand new, and I got to sort of make it my own.
And tell me about the e-commerce component. So that's direct sales from consumers on the website?
That's right. So anything Lenovo.com. So if you're coming to the site, if you're transacting, or if there's support and services, that's all through our organization.
Great. Now, I'm aware that Lenovo is actually quite an old company. It's been around since the 80s. Mm-hmm. But then, of course, most famous for acquiring the PC division of IBM. And that was really when it took off. And it's now the largest, PC manufacturer, right?
In the world, that's right.
In the world, yeah.
I
got my homework right?
You did.
Okay, great.
I'm impressed.
Thank you. Well, tell me though, the PC market has never stood still, and we're in, of course, the era of agentic AI. So tell me about the dynamics that are, effectively reshaping both the market and Lenovo. What's your perspective on how, what life is like at the moment?
It's really busy at the moment, but very exciting. I think, one of the things we've certainly seen, and we saw this starting with the pandemic, is just change in consumer behavior, right? More and more, during the pandemic, people had to buy online because the store situation, but we've seen that behavior continue, and we expect that it will continue as people get more comfortable buying online, more comfortable looking for content in various places, making that transaction, even if it is a higher consideration product. So we've seen that scaling. So I think that's one thing that's had a huge impact in what we do, and everything that we do from a Lenovo.com perspective is really looking at that consumer behavior, because customer experience is like number one for us. And so those trends and keeping mindful of what's happening there is really important. The other one is AI. That's significant as well, not only from a capability standpoint, how we service our customers, but also when you look at Lenovo's portfolio, AI is where it's at. So we've just launched a bunch new PCs with AI capability. And that's because, again, we're seeing what that consumer behavior is driving to and the needs that they have to be more productive.
If I think about the experience of your peers and the challenge that you're facing here around differentiation in a fast-moving marketplace, what are you leaning into? What's the story you're telling that allows you to differentiate in this e-commerce vertical in particular?
Yeah, for us, it's really about the experience. And that's where customer really has to be at the center. And a lot of brands talk about customer experience, and they'll say that they're customer first. I think sometimes that may be true. Sometimes it doesn't quite execute the way that you would like. I think for us, it really is at the center of everything that we do. So from a broad Lenovo perspective, we create products based on customer insights. So we know that there's a need out there as we're producing these products. From a Lenovo.com perspective, we take that very seriously. So we look at data, we look at the customer behavior, we're looking at our CX scores. We take the feedback from the customers and they're telling us what about the experience is working, what's not working. And they can be brutally honest about what they like and what they don't like, which is great for us because it gives us an opportunity to evolve and to make improvements on that experience.
So to sort of lean into a bit of the Adobe context, obviously here at Summit, I'm just guessing you like a good dashboard.
I've been known to use one or two, yes.
Tell me about the challenges you're facing and then the opportunities. What are you learning about, interrogating this data that you're speaking about?
Well, there's so much data and we have lots of dashboards.
Too much?
At times it may feel like that.
Yeah.
I think you can run into a situation where you almost feel like you have analysis paralysis because it's just so much data that you have at your disposal. How do you make these things work together, right? Because they sometimes look like they're telling you different stories. Measurement is one of the critical things that we're working on right now. And so when you look at, we've got MMO models, we have, also Adobe reporting, we have various reports that we're looking at. They don't necessarily all tell you the same story, which you wouldn't expect. There's always going to be some differentiation, but it's just really understanding what do you do with that data and what sort of picture and conclusion do you draw from that?
Yep.
And so I think that's the tricky part, but also the opportunity for the marketers to say, okay, what is my hypothesis? What problem am I trying to solve? And how do I use this data to help me do that?
Well, one of the reasons I ask is that as CMOs, and we like to think that we own the customer, or at least we understand them, what are you learning about not just customer behavior, but their sentiment through some of these tools?
True. I mean, we're always looking at the customer experience or behavior on the site, but we also have, our CX team is always looking at customer sentiment as well. So we have panels and research that we do with our customers. Anytime we want to make a change on the site, we're asking a panel of customers to actually go through that experience and tell us what they think. And so that's where we have an opportunity to really understand from their perspective what's working, what's not, what are some of the newer trends or expectations that they have that maybe we hadn't seen or thought of that now we can start adapting as we're building out further capabilities on our site.
And obviously AI has got to play a big role, but how are you not just adopting, but experimenting? Because the process you just spoke about there was very much an iterative approach.
Absolutely.
To, right?
Absolutely.
And I don't think it's particularly unique from a broader perspective. If you look at any online retailer, it's constant iteration.
That's right. I mean, for us, we would say we have a test and learn culture. So we're willing to test anything a couple of times. I think you have to be willing to because we don't know all the answers. There's a lot we don't know. And so being open-minded to say, we know that the customer has unique needs. We know that it's constantly evolving. How do we evolve that to sort of predict what they're looking for and to be able to give that to them before they have to ask for it? So our goal is always to give them a wow experience. I mean, we're in the PC business, right? So, a lot of the capabilities, maybe they see that that's sort of similar across different brands, but where we can really be unique is in the differentiation and how we express that product or how we express that experience to them. And so that's something that we put a lot of focus on as an e-commerce engine, is really looking at what does that look like for our customer and how do we continuously give them something that nobody else can give them.
What's your take on your peers and marketers in general in terms of maturity on the Gen AI early adopter status through to some of the more sophisticated trials that we're seeing around agentic AI? And by that, I mean really moving into an idea of how can I optimize everything that I do, right? Where are the friction points?
Yeah.
I'm not just trying to use, this this system to create more content. I'm actually looking to streamline entire workflows. And it's actually a totally different mindset. In general, how would you rate the sort of the maturity of your peers?
I think it's hard to, I always think sometimes, and I had this conversation at dinner with somebody last night, I always think sometimes we're never as far along as somebody else, but actually they're telling us that we're much farther along than some.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's hard to believe that because you just think, well, I always have so much more room to improve. And it's hard to believe that we could actually be best in class in something. But, I think that we are very much an entrepreneurial organization. And sometimes people find that shocking because we're part of such a large organization. But it is very much, at times, feels like you're working in a startup environment because we're just always wanting to try something new. And our leader is very much a visionary. He's very much wants to be on the cutting edge of things. And so if he sees a new idea out there, he encourages us to go look for new ideas and just go try them. Like the worst thing that can happen is that fails. It doesn't mean you break everything, but you try it, you learn from it, and you move on.
Yes.
And so that's something that, we really take to heart. And I think that we have done that in such a way that we are one of the leaders when it comes to trying out new things.
Can you give me some examples of some of the maybe orchestration or other features that you're using from the AI capabilities?
So we use a lot of the Adobe capabilities. Certainly we're using their analytics, personalization. We use their content and asset management. We just signed on with Gen Studio,
Yep.
and I'm super excited about that. Content has been, I've got lots of problems, but content is probably the big one. It's the one that keeps me up at night because we want to create personalization at scale, just like everybody else does.
Right.
And we have core segments that we are uniquely targeting. But the only way to really do that, especially when you're looking at across all of the different touch points in which they engage with us, you have to have content. And that's where we've struggled.
Well, not just have content, but more.
It's more content, but also the right content. Like I think we're building a lot of stuff. We got various teams across even just our e-commerce organization that are building content. So I run a global organization. My team produces content. My teams in the geographies also produce content. Our UX team, like everybody is producing content, but they're producing it in a very siloed way because they have unique needs. And so they're building the content that they need.
Right.
But what that means is we probably have a ton of duplicity. We don't necessarily have a lot of consistency. You can follow a brand guideline that's pretty straightforward, but when you talk about how do I want to talk to a student or how do I want to talk to a gamer or a small medium business, and those represent some of our core target audiences, we want to be consistent in how we do that. And we want to talk to our customers in a way that shows that we understand them. If I'm talking to a business owner, I want them to know that I get the trials and tribulations that they're going through as a business owner and how can I offer them support.
Right.
Or if I'm talking to a consumer, I'm talking to a gamer, what's important to them as they're gaming. So having content that really allows you to personalize those experiences is important, but knowing what content you need to produce is really important. And we don't have a great way of tracking that today.
So does that mean your entire global marketing team is effectively working in one instance of Adobe or have access to the same
They have
tools
been
and services?
working, so Gen Studio is brand new for us.
Yeah.
They've been working with agencies. So we've had numerous agencies across the globe.
Right.
Or they maybe have one or two people in their teams that can produce this content. So they're all kind of doing it in a silo. We're not sharing the content. So again, a lot of duplicity, a lot of inefficiency, I would say. What we want to do with Gen Studio is we're actually going to change our processes and change our structure to be able to better leverage this tool. So the idea is that we create a small group of content producers that are now going to produce that content. They become the subject matter experts
they in-house
and the
or
innovators.
agencies?
They will be in-house.
Yeah. Okay.
So our goal is to bring that in-house, and because there's really no reason why we can't do that in-house if you have the right tool.
Yeah.
And we believe that Gen Studio is the tool to help us do that.
What do you think is going to be the biggest challenge in that transition? And I'm asking on behalf of the
It's
listener
the people.
who's very curious. Yeah.
It'll be the people. I think that, a lot of times we all think, and myself included, I'll get this great tool and it's going to solve all these problems.
Yeah, it's not a panacea though, is it?
It's not. I mean, the reality is you have to think about the trifecta of people, process, and tech.
Right.
And you have to think about, okay, how does this change my process? How am I working today? How do I need to work with a new environment? More importantly, how do I get my team members along for the ride?
Right.
So
This is change management.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And that is how we actually approach this. So the first thing I said to Adobe was, I get the tech, I see the vision of what it can do for me, I believe in it, but I want to know, how do I change my organization to accommodate?
It's a really interesting approach to see how you're bringing in more control creatively and bringing the team along and obviously trying all these new technologies. I think one of the biggest issues I've seen over time, and this is with regards to any form of MarTech, is your team has to stay current.
That's right.
And they've got to be motivated to do that as well. So how do you tap into that passion, that desire to have a team that leans into this?
Yeah, I think we're very fortunate that we have a team of people who are just driven to learn, right? I think they're always open to new ideas. And I think it's just the culture that we've built in our organization.
Yeah.
People who just kind of want to come in and sort of just do the mundane thing don't usually survive in our organization. So I sometimes think that e-commerce and the digital spaces sort of attract a certain type of individual.
Yes.
And that's really what you need, is someone who is keen to learn,
Yes.
is not afraid to go out and look for new stuff, look for new ideas, and try to adopt them.
Yep.
So you can't have this fear of failure.
Yes.
And we don't. So we give people the room to go out and try new things. We know it's going to fail. In fact, that was one of the things as we were presenting this business case, we said to the leaders, my peers and my boss, I expect something is going to go wrong here. Like, we just have to know that. And if we're not all okay with that, then maybe we shouldn't do this.
Right.
But I think we're all adults. We all know that that's just the way of the world, right? And so the only way you grow, right, you've got to learn, you've got to be uncomfortable at some point to be able to grow. And I think that's the leap that we took with all of this.
It sounds to me like you've got a competitive lens here too, as you should, which is, if we can get this right, the lens here is use AI to get competitive advantage.
That's right.
And it's building on that idea that you're going to get beaten by people with AI, not necessarily
That's right. I think
by AI itself.
It's not just AI itself, but I always tell people, it's not the AI itself in terms of the technology, but it's the people who know how to use AI.
Yeah.
They're the ones you have to be careful of.
Okay.
Because when we first started talking about AI a couple years ago, I challenged my team. So I own all of the websites, all the content on the sites. And I said, I really want you to think about how do you test into AI and using that to make yourself more productive.
Yeah.
And gave them a couple of months. I didn't see anything. And so when I asked the question, like, what have we done? Well, we haven't done much. Well, why? Well, because we don't know what that means for us. What are you really asking us? Well, I'm asking you to go try something new. I'm asking you to figure out ways that you can streamline more of your operational parts of your job, which then allows you to be more strategic. This actually allows you to do the things that you thought of when you became a marketer in the first place.
Right.
So it was getting over a little bit of that hurdle and
Yeah.
thinking, what does this mean for my job? Are you asking me to replace myself? No, I'm asking you to reinvent yourself. But if you don't do it, someone else will.
Yeah.
So you've really got to think about long term, where do you want to be and how do you see this as an augmentation of you to become almost a newer self, where you get to be more strategic, you get to be more creative, and let AI do more of the mundane type of stuff.
Last question. Advice for your peers who might be in a similar role to you. And by that I mean driving growth, building out something on the fly, as it were, while you're doing all this work.
Yep.
And looking to achieve this big transition from a reliance on, distributed agencies to more of that in-house mentality.
I would say that you've got to have the courage to go for it. So I think a couple of things. One is having an open mind. What's going on in the market? You really do need to stay abreast of things. This market is changing so fast.
Yeah.
And when we started looking at AI technologies, it was amazing to me to see how their capabilities had evolved even in a couple of months. It's just crazy. You would never have expected it. And so I anticipate that that'll continue. And so you always have to be looking at what's going on in the market. How are things evolving? But also be proactive in saying, here's what I need, right? Think of those big problems, those hypotheses, and asking partners to help you. And that's something that Adobe has done with us, is they actually help take some of our feedback to inform the Gen Studio product, so it's been a really exciting time for us. But I think having that test and learn mentality, if you're not willing to test things, if you're not willing to fail, you're going to get left behind.
You're sounding more and more like a startup.
We
In a good way.
operate like a startup in some
Right.
ways. Yeah.
Right.
Which is what's kept me there for so long. Been there 15 years and I love it.
That's awesome. Jennifer Downs, thanks for being my guest.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
One of the things that I took away from this interview, she talked about how they have a team that is driven to learn. This learning piece really is an attitude of leaning into opportunities. If there's one thing that we're thinking about at the moment in marketing right around the world, it is, of course, AI, but behind that, how are you approaching the task of learning? Some of us have been around a while, grey hair like me, we can, actually I love learning, but a lot of people can actually find it a challenge because we're feeling this tension. I used to always do it this way. Maybe I have to do it some other way, use some other technique, and that can be hard. But the opportunity is when you get together in a team that is all exploring, learning, moving forward together, you can start to, firstly, overcome some of those internal barriers, and then secondly, start to discover some really interesting things. Learn from each other, of course, and then create new opportunities. That's what we're seeing at Lenovo, and I hope there are some lessons here. Maybe it's that or some other part of her story that really inspire you. So thanks once again for joining us on the CMO Show. It's been great to have you. My name is Mark Jones. We'll see you next time. The CMO Show is produced by ImpactInstitute in partnership with Adobe. ImpactInstitute is a professional services firm for purpose-led organisations. Our unique blend of impact consulting, brand storytelling and event services help our clients create meaningful change. This episode of the CMO Show was brought to you by your host, Mark Jones, that's me, and producers Kate Zadell and Kirsten Babels. Our audio engineers are Ed Chang and Daniel Ma. And a quick shout out to Adobe Experience Cloud, which gives digital businesses everything they need to design and deliver great customer experiences. Visit business.adobe.com to learn how Adobe can help transform your business.